When the U.S. hits Iran, the story starts with security. But the real impact may be elsewhere, because much of Iran's oil ends up in China, and it all runs through one choke point, Hormuz. So the question is, was this about Tehran or Beijing's fuel line? When the United States launches a military operation in the Middle East, the official story never starts with oil. It starts with security, nonproliferation, protecting allies. But there's a number that almost never makes it into the first paragraph. More than 80% of Iran's oil exports go to one single destination, China. About 1.38 million barrels a day, every day, year after year, through sanctions, through intermediaries, through relabeled cargo and shadow shipping routes. So the question isn't whether the United States attacked Iran. That's documented fact. The question is, did attacking Iran and attacking China's energy supply just become the same thing? China imports 70% of all its oil and gas, the largest energy import dependency of any major power on the planet. And the majority of that volume moves through one route, the Persian Gulf, through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran wasn't just a supplier inside that equation, it was the preferred supplier. And for one very specific reason. American sanctions drove away Western buyers. That turned Iranian crude into discounted crude. While the global market paid $70, $80 a barrel, China bought Iranian oil at up to 20% below the benchmark. That discount kept the teapot refineries of Shandong province alive. Small, independent, privately owned operations running on margins so thin that a few dollars per barrel meant the difference between profit and shutdown. That flow is now severed. Brent has crossed $80. Analysts project 100 plus if Hormuz closes for any sustained period. Here's the question worth asking out loud. If weakening Iran militarily makes China's energy more expensive, is that a side effect or an objective? There's no definitive answer, but the question deserves to exist. Conflicts at this scale rarely have a single cause. Operation Epic Fury can be read in 3 layers, and all 3 are simultaneously true and incomplete. Layer 1. The official narrative. Trump listed 4 public objectives: destroy Iran's ballistic missile program, eliminate the Iranian Navy, dismantle the nuclear capability, and cut funding to regional proxies. Concrete goals, verifiable, announced from the White House. And there's substance there. Iran had missiles capable of reaching American bases in Europe, a nuclear program in advanced stages. It funded Hezbollah, Hamas, Iraqi militias, Houthis in Yemen. The threat was real. Layer 2. Regional strategy. Beyond the direct Iranian threat, there's a credibility calculation. The United States maintains bases in more than a dozen countries across the Middle East. The perception that Washington might back down in the face of a nuclear Iran was eroding trust among allies. From Saudi Arabia to the Emirates, from Israel to Jordan. A power that doesn't act when its deterrence is challenged loses regional influence. That math doesn't change based on which party controls the White House. Layer 3. The systemic game. And this is where Iranian oil returns to the center of the analysis. Degrading Iran as an energy supplier doesn't just punish Tehran. It squeezes the supply chain that sustains part of China's industrial competitiveness. It demonstrates that Washington controls, directly or indirectly, access to the Gulf's energy corridors. This doesn't need to be declared as an objective to be a real consequence. And in geopolitics, structural consequences often matter more than stated intentions. Before accepting any narrative about this conflict, 4 questions deserve an answer, or at least honest reflection. Question 1. Was Iran's nuclear program built to attack or to prevent being attacked? Iranian leaders watched what happened to Iraq in 2003. They watched Libya in 2011. two countries that gave up their weapons of mass destruction programs and were subsequently invaded or overthrown. The conclusion Tehran drew from those precedents isn't hard to reconstruct. Question 2. Is the hostility between the U.S. and Iran ideological or structural? The Iran of 1979 is not the Iran of 2026, but the pattern of confrontation persists. When the root cause is structural, control of routes, regional influence, balance of power, changing the leadership doesn't solve the problem. It just swaps the actors. Question 3. What fills the vacuum? Khamenei's regime was built on 45 years of institutional structure. Eliminating the leadership doesn't eliminate the IRGC, the militias, the security apparatus. The history of the Middle East after 2003 suggests that power vacuums are rarely filled by the liberal democracy Washington imagines. Question 4. Who pays the bill? Gas prices in the U.S. jumped 11 cents in a single night. The Dow dropped over 400 points in one day. Inflation, which Trump had promised to fight as a top priority, is now facing additional pressure from a war he chose to start. The average American didn't vote to pay more at the pump because Washington decided to change the regime in Tehran. Wars have costs that don't appear in Pentagon briefings. 6 American soldiers are dead, less than a week into the conflict. Trump honored them in a White House ceremony, while announcing that the biggest wave is still coming. Each Tomahawk costs between $1.5 and $2 million. Each B-2 Spirit sortie involves logistics running into tens of millions. The operation has already exceeded 1,800 targets in 5 days. Meanwhile, the U.S. debt ceiling is under pressure. Social programs are being cut, and inflation still hasn't dropped to the level this administration promised during the campaign. The question isn't whether the conflict was justifiable on some strategic dimension. It's a question of priorities and who absorbs the consequences. The veteran who comes home with physical and psychological damage doesn't come home to Washington. He comes home to Ohio, to Texas, to a small town with no adequate health care infrastructure. This conflict doesn't end when the bombing stops. It ends, if it ends, when someone in Tehran has enough authority to sign something. But Washington is destroying every succession meeting in real time. There is no interlocutor. There is no visible diplomatic exit. The Iranian oil that fed China's industrial machine will take years to reconstitute, if it ever returns to the same level. China will pay more for energy. The average American will pay more at the pump. And the Middle East will absorb the consequences of an operation whose exit plan has not been publicly explained by anyone in Washington. Simple answers are always tempting. Good versus evil. Security versus threat. Stability versus chaos. But the conflicts that shape this century aren't simple. They're systemic. And the questions we ask about them determine the quality of the answers we'll demand, or fail to demand, from the people making the decisions. If Iranian oil was the primary energy link China built outside Western control, and that link has just been severely compromised by Operation Epic Fury, what happens next? Does Beijing accelerate the race for energy self-sufficiency through renewables, Arctic routes, and Russian crude? And if that race succeeds over the next decade, what did Washington actually gain by severing China's energy dependency on the Gulf? Because here's the paradox no one in the Situation Room is discussing. A China dependent on Gulf oil is a China that needs American naval protection, whether it admits it or not. A China that breaks free from that dependency is a China that no longer needs to factor Hormuz into its strategic calculus. By hitting Iran, Washington may have just given Beijing the one thing it couldn't manufacture on its own: urgency. The urgency to never be this vulnerable again. And that, more than any missile strike or regime collapse, might be the consequence that reshapes the century.